Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I'm building a helmet from Trench Crusade. For those that are not aware of the source material, Trench Crusade is a skirmish-style war game with factions that are extremely religious and some that come straight from hell. So there's a lot going on. But when it comes to Trench Crusade, I've been doing a ton of content on my second YouTube channel, SKS Hobbies. So if you're into miniature painting and model building, definitely check that channel out, because I made a giant 4-foot by 6-foot game board and I've been painting a bunch of the miniatures. And I figured this would be an awesome opportunity to bring those two worlds together. My love for mini painting and cosplay and costuming. So in this video, I'm going to be putting together one of the lieutenant helmets from New Antioch. This is based off of a Sallet, which is an extremely unique design, and a lot of people really like it. And in fact, if you would like to make your own, I have free PDF files available for this over on my website that you can download to build right along with the video. And just like all the rest of my builds, this is made completely out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And if you want to continue to support me and the channel, by all means, go through the links down below and pick up some HD foam. So I want to show you what it takes to put this helmet together and paint it. Let's go ahead and get started. Using my prototype to create the final templates, I'm going to start by taking part A and tracing this onto some 6mm foam 2 times. On the back side, I do like to mark the front, just so I don't have a mistake when assembling. I'm going to wear my respirator to lightly use my heat gun to start to manipulate the shape of the foam. Some weldwood contact cement is going to be applied to the interior seam. After the adhesive is dried, the two halves at the top of the helmet can be firmly pressed together. When I get about 3/4 of the way done, I'll then start in the back and move my way towards the front. This will make sure that the pieces line up exactly the way they're supposed to. This process is then going to be repeated for part B, which is also going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam 2 times. This section will have a little bit more of an aggressive curve to it, so I need to make sure to manipulate the foam and bend it just a little bit more than I did for part A. Weldwood contact cement is once again going to be used. This seam in particular is going to have a lot of tension on it, so you want to make sure that it lines up properly. And if it's not perfect, that's okay, because you can smooth it out or clean it up later on. And here you can see the base shape that we're starting to achieve while working on the top of the helmet. Part C will make up the sides, and this is also going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Just like the other pieces, I mark the front on the back side. This shape needs to have more of a compound curve, so I'm going to heat the foam up, but make sure that it domes more around the outside edge. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, attaching these shapes is somewhat tricky. Of course, you'll get better with it with practice over time, but I've always found it easier to line up the seam on the inside and then press the foam together at the top. And this is why using contact cement is very important. If I was to use a super glue or a hot glue, this seam would be a lot more difficult to assemble. So while you do need to be safe while working with products like contact cement, these products are obviously the best for the job. And while you'll see me using them compared to alternatives. With the fully formed helmet, it's now time to sand down the seams. I'm going to be using one of my custom sanding drums and a sanding sponge. A light heat treatment is going to be used to reseal the foam, and we have a decent looking shape. Now it's time to apply the armored rim to the back and sides of the helmet, which is going to consist of part D. This piece will also be cut out of 6mm foam, and I make sure to mark the middle and make a line about a 1/2 inch from the bottom. This will be a guide to let me know just how far down this piece should fit onto the helmet. Once one side had been attached, I could then mark the other with a pencil and then glue it into place. The front visor for the helmet is going to be made out of part E, which will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam 2 times. I decided to use a 1/2 inch hole punch at the back of the visor, and this is going to give me a cleaner cut. For the front though, you need to make sure that this is cut at a 25-degree angle. This angled cut is going to give me the shape that I need. Now the angle itself doesn't have to be perfect, but here you can see exactly how the two halves will line up. After a light heat treatment, so the sides of the visor can be bent inward, some more weldwood contact cement is applied to the seam. I start at the top and I work my way down, and because of the way that the template is cut, you can see that the top brow protrudes just a little bit. Just like the Part D piece, I mark about a ½ inch above the visor. This is going to give me another guide as to where it's going to sit on the front of the helmet. The sides of the visor can then be marked and wrapped around the sides of the helmet. And I am pulling these pieces pretty tight to give that front facial visor a streamlined look. The top of Part E can then be pressed and marked against the top of the helmet. This section will also be glued into place using some super glue. And here you can see with all the pieces glued down, this is what gives that helmet that distinctive look. Using my leather hole punch once again, I'm going to be creating some fake rivets out of some 4mm foam. Now the hole punch that I'm using is a ½ inch, but feel free to use whatever size that you would like for your helmet. Now I decided to put 3 rivets on each side, 1 on the visor and 2 on the Part D section. But you of course could change this by adding as many or as few as you would want. To signify that this is the Lieutenant's helmet, I'm going to be adding the Part F detail to the front. This template will be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. Once the piece has been cut out, it could then be attached using some super glue, and you can see here that it lines up over that central seam. And as a final touch, I used a 1/4 inch hole punch to add a 2mm rivet to the front of this piece. And of course, no piece of armor on the battlefield looks quite at home without some battle damage. These marks were all achieved using my rotary tool and a sanding drum. To give the metal a little more texture, I'm going to be using the tinfoil technique, but in the opposite way as I would use it to create leather. This time I'm heating up the tinfoil, not the foam. This will allow the metal to emboss the foam and not allow the details to look quite so dramatic. To seal my foam, I'm going to be using 2 light coats of Plastidip and a coat of Flex Seal. The Flex Seal was heavily applied in some areas so that I could take it away with a paper towel while it's still wet. This will give the surface a lot of texture and visual interest. Another layer of Plastidip was applied over the Flex Seal once it had fully cured. For my base colors, I'm going to be using Krylon's Red Oxide Primer and some Valspar Red Flat. For the hand painting process, I'm going to start with a wash of Liquitex Heavy Body Cadmium Free Red Deep. This is applied to the surface using a lot of water, and excess pigment can be mopped up using a damp paper towel. Layer 2 consists of more of the Red Deep, this time with less water. The pigment is applied with a mop brush in more specified highlight areas. And of course, layer 3 is going to be our brightest sections, once again still using that Red Deep. And here you can see how just using paint, I'm creating highlights and shadows. For the exposed metal and the battle damage, I'm going to be using some Liquitex Heavy Body Bright Silver. This will be applied to the surface with some smaller detail brushes, making sure not to get any of these metallics onto the flat red. Now of course you could easily overdo this, but I'm trying to pick out small sections where it looks like the paint might have flecked away. On that same train of thought, I'm going to be using the side of a filbert brush to simulate edge highlights for chipped paint. This is as easy as just tapping the surface with the side of the brush. This will give it more of a random appearance instead of just brushing it on. To paint the sword detail on the front, I'm going to be using some Gilding brass, primarily used to detail a lot of different types of picture frames. It requires absolutely no water to be painted on and has great coverage. But because of that, I'm extremely careful not to get it onto the red. If I was to make a mistake, this paint cannot easily be wiped away. I would have to wait for it to dry and then paint over it with more of the red deep. Now because the gold itself is a little too vibrant, I'm going to apply some dirty down rust. But in this case, I don't want the rust effect, so I am going to water it down and apply it and then wipe a lot of it away with a damp paper towel. This will slightly tint the gold, and it's the same process I'm going to use on the exposed metal areas on the helmet. But adding a little bit of color to the battle damage makes a huge difference in its overall appearance. So you all can see what it takes to put this new Antioch helmet together, and I hope that you have a lot of fun making your own. And in fact, if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.